I could say that I traveled a lot at Grab already. In the sense that in 2.5 years, I kind of had like already 3 different positions. The first one is more about product analytics, so providing insights in order to improve our product on a constant basis, especially on the experience part. So our consumers, our drivers, and our merchants. After that, I had a stint, and I'm still there actually, in analytics strategy. So how to design the analytics function across Grab so that analytics is fully empowered to provide insights wherever they need to do so. And recently, I took over the marketing analytics team. So handling all types of campaigns and trying to understand where efficiencies are, where inefficiencies are as well, and ensure that like there's great return from our marketing offline and online. So I hope that I'll be able to share some learnings from my experience to you today. I have to put a disclaimer that it's like a point of view that I'm going to bring that is extremely personal, coming from my experience, right? It might not be industry standards, but I was given the chance to talk, so I'm going to talk. Yeah, I hope you'll find it interesting. But I know that there's like quite a big mixed bag of people here. I have like, I can see some product managers, some designers, some analysts to be, some already analysts, some people managers in analytics teams. I even see some friends here, some that I worked with, some that I never worked with, but that never understood what I was doing. So I'm going to try to level the talk to everyone in the sense that, and ensuring that everyone is able to understand what I'm saying. So it might seem high level sometimes, but I still hope that you can learn things. Last thing before starting for real, I would like the session to be interactive, so feel free to prompt any questions in the chat. I still have a look at it all the time. And yeah, I'll stop sometimes between the different sections to look at these and answer them later. So the agenda for today, I'm going to talk about a few things. So I want to chat about the buzzword that data is. I think that we've heard so many times that word, but like, what does it mean exactly? And what does it mean to be data driven as well for a company? Then I'm going to touch upon a few non-negotiables. So things that are crucial and vital to know and to master if you want to embrace that data driven culture. Then I'm going to try to just take 2 angles. So the first one will be from an analyst perspective. So what are the different skills that are required and how usually those people are. And then I'm going to take it like from the other angle, that is the non-analyst, right? And try to draw to draw some things about the collaboration and how to ensure that like those teams can work well. And then a few closing notes on anything that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so let's start. So the buzzword data. I'm not really into mainstream in general, but I have to admit that like when I entered the data field, I was like, okay, that's still cool. Because one of the first things that I heard about data analyst / data scientist is that it was supposed to be like the sexiest job of the 21st century. There were like so many articles and not you know, like low quality news or media or providers, but like even in Harvard business reports, right? Like it's something that was extremely trendy. What's interesting is that it said that it's the sexiest job of the 21st century, but I also found articles that say that it's already the sexiest job for the next century. So it seems like there's a consensus here to say that, yeah, data scientist / data analyst is important. And we see like more and more business leaders hiring these profiles in their companies because they believe that it's going to bring some more effectiveness to their business. I'm saying data scientist, we can say data analyst. Actually, it really depends on the companies. To me, what matters is more the use case, but all in all, the core of the skills is quite similar. It's about how to handle data at scale and provide insights, right? And use the best the data. So the tools and models might vary, but at the end of the day, yeah, they tend to be the same. It's maybe like more into the implementation, more about the stakeholders, but it is the same. Like for example, at Grab, our analytics team, everyone is a data scientist, part of the analytics team. So yeah, the data is supposed to be sexy. That's what people would say, right? That's not necessarily what people would feel, as the second article is saying. Actually, many of the data scientists feel misunderstood and invisible. And yeah, I'll explore that a little bit later, but maybe the analytics people are a specific kind, okay? Another thing about data is that it's scary for a lot of people, okay? So you can see the driver has arithmophobia, that is the scientific term to say that someone is afraid of numbers. I was checking the definition and it was crazy. Like it was talking about like breathlessness, dizziness, sweating, nausea, etc. I don't think that numbers should harm so much people, and it's not that scary. More realistically, it's probably the complexity and the number of numbers that is seen that usually scares people. And especially, I mean, even in companies, right? Like people outside of the analytics teams could see that as like extremely impressive and would not want to touch this. How many times I've seen in my teams or with some of the stakeholders that they absolutely don't want to calculate anything. They would just send you a file and they would tell you, oh, I'm not good at math. I know you'd be better. Can you please do it for me? Yeah, so it's not, to me, it's not a great behavior to adopt, but there are ways actually to tackle this. And another thing is that you don't need to be a good mathematician or a good statistics person to be good with data. And the other way around exists, like you cannot be only good at math in order to be good at with data. And that's really important to understand. So I'll come back to that later. Another myth that exists is that data is gold, okay? It's shiny, you can tell your friends in other companies that you're working on a specific data set. Let's say, oh yeah, at Grab, I work with all the different rides and food orders, and there's so much data and it's amazing. And yeah, and people would say, oh, that's so cool, but anyway, I don't understand what you're doing. So that's really high level. So gold is usually seen as rare and perceived to have value and, let's say, higher status, but not sure if like the data is so much worth, because actually, and the parallel exists with gold. If you want to obtain value from gold, you need to make coins, you need to create some jewelry, and data is the same actually. The data in its raw aspect is nothing. If it's dirty data, if it's unorganized, if it's put everywhere with absolute no cohesiveness, then it's a problem and it's bad gold, right? And what matters is like the way you would collect this data, the same as you would mine gold, how you manipulate it and how you analyze it to get the most of it. And I took here like the biggest gold nugget that I could find online, and I did that because we heard so much about big data as well. And usually it's not about the size, but it's more about like how you use this data, right? So what matters a lot is the quality of data, right? Like you would not have like a great necklace, let's say, if your gold is not pure. Okay, so what matters is really the quality of data and the tools that you would use. You would want an experienced goldsmith with the right tools rather than like an apprentice with a hammer, in order to deal with this goal. So same with data. And in our industry, like we know that the biggest companies leverage this community in an extremely powerful way. I won't name any, but like Criterion Grab are probably part of those, right? Like how to handle data at scale with quality and in order to generate insights. And actually what really matters and what is really valuable is the insight itself that the goal can create, right? So those companies invest in the entire process. They would design their teams in such a way. And yeah, actually it's insight that is gold, it's not the data. So there are plenty of things to, plenty of myth and generalization to be avoided. And I would say that like it's part of the responsibility for the companies to embrace such a culture, right? To convene what's important about data. So what does it mean to be data driven? Okay, so as I was saying, it's another buzzword. It's something that, like, from my experience, I've always seen performance reviews, like whenever the analysts are coming up with their influence in teams, they would say, oh, I was successfully data driven in that approach, right? And the question is like, what does it mean actually? And it's not necessarily something that is extremely clear, although we would use it a lot. And I even had like recently, and I'm not sure if that person is online in the Zoom call now, but like at some point I was seeing like the word data driven too much. I'm like, but don't you believe that we're too data driven and that we might be slow in what we're doing? So there's a trade-off, right? Like, what is the right level of data driven that we need? Well, first, it's important to understand like what data driven is. So being data driven means that we're able to make better decisions up and down the org chart with data. Okay, so it's not only a team. It cannot be isolated to the analytics team. It has to be the entire company to carry a data driven culture. And it doesn't go only one way, it goes all ways. So up and down. So a few traits to be data driven in my sense. So first, it's important to make decisions at all levels possible of the organization, and especially at the lowest possible level. Okay, so there should be a good mix of decisions, right? And those being data generated. It will usually depend on the level of context that teams have, right? But the analysts should be empowered to come up with decisions and insights, right? Because they have access to the data. At the same time, they cannot decide on everything. Obviously, there might be like some strategic concerns. There might be some problems that they're not aware of because of confidentiality. But it's important to empower the analysts there. They have the data, and they usually have like a responsibility of go versus no go. Then it's really important for the company to understand that the highest the quality of data is, the better the insights will be. And there needs to be an investment there. It cannot be only non-scalable architecture for your data. It has to have a team that is dedicated in cleaning, in maintaining those data pipelines that analytics teams are using. And it's crucial to recognize this. And without this, I don't think you can qualify yourself as a data-driven organization. Another thing is we want to carve out some time for analysts, and we want to ensure that like we develop a desire for insighting, right? And having a deeper understanding of areas, regardless of whether it's marketing or product or business or for a specific country or for a specific grab vertical. It has to be across, right? And stakeholders and leaders usually would need to embrace this. They need to develop that desire to know more. It's known that you can make decisions like this, right? And you don't necessarily need this data. But the data-driven culture at least tells you, okay, I have data, I'll have a check, and we'll see. And this is like this constant routine that is being developed. Then there's a desire as well of experiment and research always. So there's like the insighting, which is, okay, I already have data. Let me crunch the numbers and I'll come up with like new insights. But sometimes there are new data sources. There's like new signals that you want to to include. I'm going to talk a little bit later about experimentation, but it's extremely important as well. It's in the desire for an analytics team to be giving out the truth. Well, in order to do this, you understand that like it's important to ensure that we can experiment on things in order to be 100% or 95% confident about what we're saying. So if a team or if a company does not do this, then it means that there are other priorities which are not data-driven. It can be business-driven, it can be target-driven, but it won't necessarily be data-driven. There's a need to appreciate what's not certain, and things are always changing. There's a lot of technicalities, of course, when it's about analytics, but yeah, everyone needs to understand this. How many times per year, let's say, an analytics team is suffering because the infrastructure is broken, or because like there's a latency in how early we're getting the data, right? So everyone needs to be understanding this. And the last piece, insights are nice, but they become gold if they're really useful. So if you get those insights, if you can tell like, okay, this new grab vertical is extremely efficient for us as an ecosystem, well, you want to implement it and you want to provide some more iterations in order to always improve your product, right? And this is like where the essence is, like those insights are supposed to be actionable. And once the actions happen, then it's cool. So yeah, so that's about being data-driven here. Another thing that is important in my eyes is to understand like what analytics can do in terms of different things, right? And usually we would look at different functions. Like I'll quote the ones that I worked on, so product analytics, business analytics, marketing analytics, and I'm often being asked, so is there a big difference? I would say not so much. It's more a matter of stakeholders, of processes, of business context, right? But at the end of the day, it requires like the same skills, and it always revolves around this graph that is about, okay, what happens, why does it happen, and how can I improve this, right? So a matter of like finding like the problem, explaining the problem, and solve the problem. And it's always those three things, right? And so there are a bunch of sub-disciplines, right? We can talk about descriptive analytics, we can talk about diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. Usually it will be a good indication of how mature your analytics team is. Usually the not so mature ones would focus more on only what happened, but they would not necessarily invest analytics resources in the rest. Right? It will depend on like the level of depth you're going into. And yeah, so between the different functions, at the end of the day, we're always kind of doing the same, right? This type of root cause analysis. No. Of course, and I'm happy to take questions even later or talk about it, but yeah, there are some specifics to each of the branches. So a marketing analyst will have a different day than a product analyst, of course, but the principles are the same. Okay, so that's it about like the general concepts of data. I want to jump into what I believe are some non-negotiables, okay, and what truly matters for everyone to get to know in order to be successful within an analytics team. So I'll cover three things. Of course, there's many others, but at least I wanted to pick those ones. So first, we often talk about data visualization. Okay, what really matters, it's not how beautiful it looks, but what matters is that everyone can read it and understand it. Okay, so I've already done a talk last year in Jakarta on that specific topic, so I could like spend hours on it. But I'm just going to quote a story that does not belong to my professional experience, but that I quite like, even though it's quite a sad one. But in the 80s in the United States, there were like a lot of space shuttle programs that were launched. by the NASA in order to send some spacecrafts with humans inside from Earth to the space, right? And this picture is actually the Challenger. That is like the second orbiter of the program after Columbia, and it was actually strong, right? It had like 9 successful launches or something like that before, and actually the impact of those programs were huge in terms of financial. So that program used to cost like maybe $50 billion if you take into account the inflation, which is huge. And there was like a lot of buzz as well. Again, like the president at that time, I think it was Reagan, announced the launch of that specific mission. And it was extremely important because there was like the first civilian that would go there. It was a teacher. In order to inspire the public, like the entire country, so that they get interested into the space exploration and science in general. Like there was a lot of hope there, and yeah, there was like big coverage. So that's the team that is supposed to go in that mission, right? And what happened actually on the day of the expedition is that it was a really cold day. Okay, it was like 36 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's like negative something Celsius, or 2 degrees Celsius, I think, if I remember. And what happened is that after 73 seconds of launch, the spacecraft exploded in the sky. So it killed immediately everyone that was on board. Okay, reason is that it seems like they underestimated the importance of one component, which is called the O-ring seals. And they were not designed to handle this unusual temperature, okay? It led to like some structural failure, and basically with all the forces that exist in space, then it completely broke. And you can see like the very sad picture here. So actually what caused this? Well, there were some doubts about these specific components and how they would be handled under cold temperatures. And the decision-making process here was not super thorough at that time. I mean, and it's not a blame on the generation like the 80s at all, but like it's maybe like the team there that was not necessarily prepared for this. So that's basically here like the data that they were able to see and to make decisions, right? And from that table, they just told themselves that actually, yeah, that it seems fine. There's not so many failures. It will be okay. And the problem here is that actually managers just overruled the different recommendations from the engineers, right? But engineers were not necessarily able to communicate well on that specific potential issue. So from my perspective and from the perspective of a lot of people, actually having such a data set, you cannot understand much, right? And there are plenty of ways to make it slightly better, of course. Like you could at least order per temperature and see how the failures are growing or not, if it goes colder and colder. You can even pull graphs, right? In terms of number of failures per temperature. You can even apply statistical models that would be like linear regressions, right? In order to predict the number of failure for a specific temperature. Or you can come up with like more elaborated ones, right? So this last graph is actually built by the expert of data visualization called Tufti. And there's a lot of work from him, right? He's able to put some theory and some principles behind visualizations in general that everyone can read with a guided set of principles. I really encourage you to read. It's super interesting. Like books are big and beautiful, and for sure it's something that to us seems like quite far, right? It's like space exploration, but can you imagine how it could impact all different projects that we're part of, right? I could count like so many times, so many events in the past where just a mistake in the graph that I was creating or that my team was creating could lead as a mistake of interpretation. And what's important with data is to ensure that the language used is the same. Okay, so when we talk to each other, it's better if like we speak the same language, English, right? regardless of the accent, of course, but at least we can understand each other. Well, same for data visualization. If you don't have that, if you cannot make clear graphs, then you won't be able to be successful because you're not optimizing at all. You will spend a lot of time explaining again and again. There might be missing information that are so important for the understanding of the graph that you want to avoid that, right? So one sentence that Tufty said is that the minimum that we should hope for any display technology, so it can be graphs, it can be dashboards, is that it should do no harm. Okay, and it's something that analytics teams and non-analytics teams as well should be aware of, like how to give a sense of data and insights so that there's absolute no problem in understanding it. And you can see like such an approach by many teams. I've tried to do that a lot of times as well, to ensure that like the teams come up with like standardized dashboards and templates for the sake of simplifying the understanding, right? It's also like playing with the fact that brains are really into graphical data rather than like numbers. And of course, they will get used to see the same colors, the same display of information. But honestly, it's really hard. If you don't do it at start, then you cannot like change all of your dashboards into a single template, right? So it has to be all the teams and all the employees to come up with that sense of data visualization. Data visualization is important. Okay, another piece that is extremely important when it's about data is that correlation does not imply causation. Okay, so you can see this graph. It shows in black the trend year over year of number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets, and in red it's like the per capita cheese consumption. And I didn't pick this one because I'm French, but I found it quite funny. You can check like the website. It's called Spurious Correlations. It's always really funny. There's like a lot of absurd graphs that are put together, and if you misread the graph and if you misread the information that is given there, you can come up with the assumption that, yeah, maybe if you consume more cheese, then your bedsheet will kill you more. and that's a big problem. It's something that is often seen, right? Like when you see trends in a graph, you might want to conclude too quickly because you see that trends are going up all together, and you're like, okay, so this is what happens. Like the more cheese we consume, the more like people are dying because of the bed sheets, right? And it's really applicable in every single graph that you could see in a company. It's extremely important to understand the difference between correlation and causation, right? Correlation basically describes how two trends or two variables are related, right? While actually causation tells you that one event is the result of the occurrence of another event. Okay, so here there's no causation, right? Like it's not because you consume more cheese that your bed sheet will kill you more. Okay, that's really important to understand the concept. To be honest, that applies in life as well. It's not about data. Like don't jump on your assumptions and try to point fingers at something if you don't really have the essence of why this thing is happening. Then the last piece is about the experimentation. Okay, and it goes back to the causation point. And like when you see two trends, it's really hard to understand like, yeah, if there's like a root cause that can be identified. One way to do so, and it applies in marketing analytics, in product analytics, it's to experiment, right? The usual keyword is A/B test, okay? At Grab, like after a few months, I was assigned this experiment, right? Which is first, when we were loading the app, we were actually bringing the user directly to the transport screen, right? And then users were able to change the different services in that top bar right here. And And there was like more and more ideas about like becoming a super app, like an app that does everything, right? But we kind of believed, and the hypothesis that this top bar is actually not nudging enough our users to use food and delivery. So we wanted to experiment this, right, with a home screen, a new home screen that you guys are hopefully aware of. But then you would be able to explore the different services, right, as an intermediate screen. And then if you click on either car or bike, then you would land on the transport screen, okay? The only way to understand like the impact of this new screen is to perform an A/B test, okay, or an experiment. And that's the only way to do so. If you don't do it, if you decide to roll out this new screen and you look at graphs, then you will fall into the correlation bucket again. And you won't be able to say, hey, actually my home screen brings me 10% more food orders because now the food tally is like more visible. And that's the only way. And it's something that is extremely important because it's part of an entire process, right? Like, are we okay to be data-driven enough to maybe spare 1, 2 weeks, a month in order to decide that, yeah, this screen is really helpful or not? To be frank, like the experiments around the home screen lasted for maybe 6 to 9 months because there were like some different contentions, right, in terms of services or verticals or countries, you know. And so we were iterating a lot there, but that was necessary. That was necessary because it's the only way for us to tell if the screen works or not, right? And we know that sometimes as an analytics team, we might get frustrated because it's not always possible to come up with that truth. Sometimes business might push for an agenda because they want to roll out that screen now, because there might be like marketing dependencies, because like the campaigns are ready already. We know that, but at the same time, if you want to be data driven and understand like what's the real impact, that's the only way to go. Okay. So I'll maybe take a break. Yes, already been talking a lot. There are a few questions I'm going to take in the chat. I see one. How can we understand the reasons behind causation then? I guess like the experimentation side was covering this, right? Like this is the only way to prove scientifically. There are also models that exist where you don't launch an experiment, but you can still come up with some sense of causation, but it's not as scientific, I would say, and introduces a lot of doubts. Hey Vinh, any tips based on your experience on how to communicate the need for causation, correlation, differentiation to opinionated business stakeholders? How to bring up this conversation when everyone seems to be looking at biased data or taking shortcuts? Okay, thanks for the very interesting question. Clearly, it seems that like the problem does not belong only to where I work, but it's clearly like something that is tough. I think it goes back to the idea of be sure of the decisions that you're making, right? Like the more causal you can go in the way you analyze and you can explain why things happen, the more informed you are for your decision. But like if some stakeholders decide not to, well, in a way that's the problem, and it's the problem of the company, right? Like the analytics team is equipped to come up with those insights, right? To tell them, okay, most likely it won't work. And there's this need of transparency that should exist, right, all the time. Unfortunately, it happens that sometimes the decisions are being made, right? And for example, the example of the Challenger explosion in the sky is exactly this. Like stakeholders did not necessarily buy in those numbers, maybe because they were not being displayed those numbers in the right way. So I would say that, and it's important for, again, analytics to be extremely transparent, is to ensure that like this conversation is being brought up all the time, that considering an insight or a correlation is fine if we're okay about the different drawbacks that exist, right? Sometimes we want to go for causation analysis all the time, but sometimes it's just not possible. So it's part of the risks that are taken. Okay, I don't see any other question for now. So I guess I'll continue. Okay, the next piece, as I was saying, is I just went through the few elements that to me are critical in ensuring that like teams are successful, right, regards to analytics. But I want to take time to understand a bit more what's needed for everyone. And maybe like what's the psychology behind analytics teams, right? I want to start first with the non-technical, because from a really personal perspective, I think this is what makes the biggest difference between a very good analyst and a good analyst. And like usually, bachelors and masters are kind of giving the same hints about how to use data tools or databases. And yeah, I mean, even like you can learn from all those online platforms for learning as well. It's fairly easy to pick up if you're motivated, right? It's not that like people are not able to do it. No, it's possible. But on the non-technical side, there are a few things that to me are extremely important. So first, and it's something that is always written in job descriptions, it's critical thinking. Okay. It's quite vague, to be honest, as a concept, but how I would translate it is, it's for me like how an analyst or anyone is able to objectively analyze questions, hypotheses, and results, right? Always have like a doubtful mindset. Whenever you're like facing a problem, you need to understand everything about that problem. You need to see that problem from different views and perspectives. If I take the example of that home screen, I would say, well, you want to consider the point of view of the overall Grab ecosystem, and is it good for us? But you might want to see as well as if each specific vertical, let's say transport or food, is doing well. And the fact of like thinking that way will make you change your approach, right? You will also want to look at specific user behavior, like are people churning? Are people transacting more? And this ability then to think objectively about a question will help you like, yeah, I mean, be able to assess the problem in a better way, right? So it's a valuable skill that, to be honest, is not only for analytics teams, right? But I would say it's even more important in order to find insights and to generate like the best value out of the data. The next one that I see, and it's usually a big problem for some reason in analytics teams, is to communicate effectively. Okay. What I'm saying here is that because it's fairly complex what is being done, right? Like there's so much information that is being manipulated. In a way, it might be hard for people to understand, right? And that's why like data visualization is important. It's one part of an effective communication. What I mean here is more that it's important to be able to translate those insights into business relevant terms, or in a language that does not necessarily incorporate all the complexity of the analysis that is being performed, and still be able to convey a little bit like the main steps of the analysis, right? So to be frank, I think it's like one of the biggest problems that I've seen in the analytics teams. Like usually it is hard for, and especially for junior analysts, to think outside of the box, and usually those analysts are like extremely dedicated in the process of data mining, of playing with databases, that at the end of the day, they must forget about the stakeholder or the non-analytics person that works with them. They usually don't have the same savviness in terms of vocab and in terms of understanding. And so there's always a need of translating well the insight, right? Otherwise, again, it's lack of, it's a lack of communication, I would say. Yeah. Another thing that is extremely important is that the analyst needs to be keen in solving problems It's actually like, it's part of the DNA, right? If you're an effective problem solver, then you're able like to dig to the root of problems, right? And you're able to know as well what approach to adopt to solve a problem. So it's really about like identifying the opportunities, right? Like when you see a data set, you will know which data to look at, right? And that's important. And one thing that is extremely crucial as well is to always be doubtful. So there are always assumptions, right, that exist that usually business or product stakeholders might use, but you always want to be sure that like this statement applies for whatever you're trying to solve, right? So in a way, it's a little bit like you trying to see if anything that is being told to you is true or not. Right? You're seeking for the truth. And the last one is having like some sort of product or business sense, right? So you want to be sure to understand what the business needs, what the product needs before acting. If you do this without that, then most likely your analysis won't be relevant. Okay, you want to understand what your organization or your team is trying to solve, and you want to be able to translate this into more technical aspects, right? So that you're on point with your analysis. So these are like extremely important, and it's not only something for analytics people, but to me they're key, because with only technical skills you cannot you cannot be efficient in understanding what other people are talking about. In terms of technical skills, I guess I'll go quite fast, but yeah, there's everything related to data preparation. So how to gather, how to arrange, how to process the data, regardless of the volume. It can be small, it can be large, it can be structured, it can be unstructured, it can be in 50 different databases, only one. What's important here is to be able to gather everything and start mining. Then there's, oh yeah, the visualization part. Okay, so this one is important. If you're like the previous slide about Challenger, then for sure you might be like the best technically, right? But like if your visualization is not on point, then it won't be understood by anyone. Then there's a bit of programming. So usually this one is the one that is the most hated by analysts to be, and especially those that are changing career path, right? Maybe like some that are, I don't know, account managers or marketing managers want to take a stab at being an analytics team member. Well, usually it's going to be harder for them, but it's not impossible. And that's something that is crucial to know. Programming is not always necessary as well. There are different levels of complexity. You can be an excellent data analyst with only Excel skills or Google Sheets skills. Hence, like the first one, and I mean the first two bullets are there. But like when you start to analyze bigger amounts of data, right? You want to be efficient in the way you code, and you want to make it easy to maintain. So that's why it requires some programming skills. Usually we start with more SQL, so database related programming languages. But the more you want to automate, the more you want to go into like proper programming languages such as Python, R, Java, etc. Okay, next one, it's about math and statistics. Okay, in order to perform like data analysis, you need to have a sense of the main concept of math and statistics, and it's something that it's not, again, not only about analytics teams, but everyone. Like you need to know what is a simple average versus a weighted average. That's something that is critical, and it's fairly simple. We can go even more complex into the different models, but what's needed here is at least to know what the models are doing, right? Understand like the pros and cons for each model, and to apply them with rigor in order to get those insights. I would say that like the more fluent you are in programming languages and math and statistics, more hardcore you can go in analytics. But again, it's not necessary. It will really depend on the function and the use cases that you're trying to solve. Okay, so I took that from Towards Data Science, which is like the Medium blog, and I found it quite interesting. It's like the five main roles in an analytics team, right? So you have like the first one, the connector, which is like the one that gets the context from the business. It's known that like analytics need context to work, and in order to produce analytical results that are good, right? You want to ensure that your context is correct. So usually there will be like someone a bit more specialist in this, like maybe the more business or product savvy person. Then you have the wrangler, that is basically the data person, like knows how to code, knows where the data is able to clean and transform, is able to know, is basically a data glossary almost. Then you have the detective, that is the more what we believe a data analyst / data scientist is. So it's about finding trends, it's about generating insights. Then you have the artist, that is more like about the data visualization piece and how to communicate insights in general. Ensure that like the message that is conveyed is accurate. And then you have the automator, right? So there to save time for the rest of the team and be more efficient. So maybe I'm gonna just like prompt you guys, like if you have access to the chat, who do you think is the most useful in an analytics team between the 5 roles? I'm interested to know. So you can type this in the chat directly and just read. Okay, do we have to choose one? Everyone? Connector, wrangler, artist, yeah, detective. I can see all the different roles, and thanks for answering. Yeah, actually, the answer that I have in mind that is correct is actually everyone. Everyone is important. Like if you lack of one specific role, you will probably not be as successful as possible. Right? Everyone plays a role in the analytics team, and depending on the size of the team, well, it's usually hard to have a specialist of each. You might have like some people with like more appetite towards coding. You have people that are more likely to be part of business meetings. But usually, and especially like when there's like a strong business focus and when your teams are built that way, you need your team to be good at everything, right? And that's important to have in mind. I like this analogy that like an analyst is like a Swiss knife army. You can do everything with an analyst, right? You can be part of business meetings. I used to do that a lot when it was like in business analytics, where meeting a lot of clients and trying like to convince them with insights that the solution that we provide is good. In terms of wrangler, well, it's needed because especially in high growth companies, usually your data is not super clean. So you will need to always come up with like new pipelines. And the more experience you get, then the more knowledge about the data you would get. Detective, of course, it's like maybe the core of it. And yes, I would say that it's important because the insights generation is like the core of my talk, right? Like ensuring that it's not only about data, but like the generation of insights from the data. Artist is there, of course, to get like the right view and ensure that everyone speaks the same language. And automator, it's quite key. It helps like actually getting more bandwidth for the analysts in order to provide insights. I'm gonna like deviate slightly. Usually there's like a lot of, how to say, anxiety about the diversity of work that analytics teams can feel. Usually they would see that they are not part of big projects enough, and that they would usually do small tasks, right? There are like some common terms in the industry about like data monkeys or data ATMs, which is usually something that like analytics leaders don't want to encourage, but it usually happens still, right? I remember like one of my reports. I won't name the one, but like was telling me that in the previous company of the person, they used to be like a lot of analysts, but that person was more of an automator, and at the end of the day, managed like to in a way shrink the size of the team because of the automation, right? At the end of the day, it's not necessarily what we want. We want like the analysts to spend more time spending in mining for insights, but the automation is quite key here. And it goes to my next slide, that is about the needs. Usually those analysts will need like to be part of a team. And I'm not saying this like just be part of an analytics team, but like they need to be in contact with the product people, like the business people, like the engineering teams, so that like they can really give as much value from the data to everyone. There's a need to get the right resources. So in terms of tools, in terms of time, in order to scale more of the insights that they are generating. They want to be independent. So that's something that is important. They don't want to be told exactly what to be done. And that's fair in the sense that usually the analyst has access to the whole data, of course, right? And usually the insights, it's not like you know exactly which insight you will drive when you see a problem, right? Like this is where the mining is. And so usually you will need to allocate enough time for the analyst to be able to independently look after those insights. Explore is also part of it. Right? You want to give some time for the analyst to get new data sources. You want the analyst to try new things. And the last piece is ensure that like this analyst has influence. Okay, so it's not good to have like an analytics team that is not part of the bigger scope. You want them to be able to shine whenever it's needed. You need also to let them be whenever they need to be, so that they can generate those insights. But it's important for the team, right? And I guess like this is what the article about like the sexiest job in the 22nd century was referring about, like being misunderstood. I think that there's a right balance that needs to be found, right? One of the main reasons is maybe the fact that analysts are usually technical, but they are also non-technical, and they belong in a way to two worlds. Okay, maybe I'll stop for a little while. Can you explain the roles with real use cases from Grab? So a short answer, at least in my teams, people are doing everything of the 5 roles. However, because the analytics function is fairly big at Grab, we develop a model called Analytics Center of Excellence, where we still have like some centralized teams that will help in heavy data pipeline engineering. You will have teams that will help in providing more automated tools, right? But this effort is actually made by all teams. So at the end of the day, all analysts are actually working on the 5 roles. What is the ideal reporting structure for analytics person? Reporting to central analytics team versus reporting to business product. Both have the pros and cons. What do you think is best? Very interesting question. So it was actually like my biggest project for part of the analytics strategy role that I'm in. It's tough because there are pros and cons. Usually the pros are more towards having like the analyst being comfortable within the career path, right? Being under the analytics umbrella. It's very important because analysts are technical, right? They want to usually explore more, innovate more. And usually like reporting to a business line, they believe that it's harder for them to get that. Although it has the pro when you report to a business or product line to be closer to the business, right? That said, we decided to go for the former. So all the functional teams to report into one central structure in order to benefit from all the tools that exist for the knowledge sharing, but still with a heavy accent on the functions themselves, so marketing analytics or business analytics. When does it make sense to have an analytics team versus an analyst? Okay, I think I replied to that question. I think that it has to be seen like case by case, but in the context of Grab, the analytics team is quite large. We're like 3 digits in terms of numbers. And we see a lot of value in standardizing a lot of things, because if, let's say, like your team is small, right? Like let's say in your company you have like 4 or 5 analysts, it might be easier still to create like some sort of synergy between those analysts, even if they don't report into the same structure. But I would say that there's less efforts in terms of standardization that exists in such cases. For Grab, we have that need because of the size. Out of these roles, which roles have more interaction with product manager, UX designers? Can you throw some light on interaction between PM and data scientists? So at Grab, I would say that there's, and if I go back to the previous slide, I would say that we want the analysts to be good in all different roles, but usually they are like the more technical roles, such as automator or wrangler. Let's say that PMs, also product managers, won't necessarily have so much purview on this. They will be more into the investigations because they want to understand as well how the product is doing. The connector as well, because usually they would have like similar meetings together and they would need like to get the same context. And the artist, yeah, usually it's important for them to speak the same language. Okay, I think I have like 15 minutes.
Okay, Vin, I think we have missed a few questions. Do you mind taking them right now?
I can.
Okay, fair enough. So Vinda asked if there is any scientific method that can be used to measure critical thinking skill, or any framework that can be used to improve critical thinking.
Whoa, that's a tough one. So usually, like when we hire, we try to come up with like critical thinking oriented questions, right? Like asking a problem and expecting the candidate to break down the problem in a structured way. I personally don't know any scientific method to measure this, right? Usually it's more about ensuring that the non-analytics person that works with that is happy about like the way the problem was broken down, and as well like a matter of ensuring that like all different dimensions are covered, right? But there's no scientific method, because in theory you have like so many different ways to tackle a problem and how to solve it. So yeah, I'm not aware of any framework there, but happy to discuss this offline.
Okay, and yeah, the next question would be from Sumit. So how do you push business to consume insights and turn it into actions? Most of the times, findings and insights just become a nice story. How do you enable and push team to take action?
That's a really great question. I would say that it's it's a chicken and egg, right? Like the first time you manage to generate an insight that that is actually extremely powerful for, let's say, a client, like it's usually how it goes, right? Like, oh, there's a nice reception of that insight, so we're going to try again and again. I think it's important for the analytics team to tag along as much as possible in terms of like what the business wants. Okay, and that's why it's important to not have like so much gap between analytics teams and non-analytics team. Like having the context is important. The closer you are to the context, the more relevant your insights will be, right? Rather than like trying to come up with a nice story and basically do your work as per stated in the job description. I would say that like the essence of the team is really to, yeah, accompany the stakeholder in the sense and be as relevant as possible. Sometimes it doesn't work, and I'm going to touch upon that later a bit, but it requires some work from the stakeholder as well.
Okay, thanks. So we have another question from Sumit, and it would be the last question for now, at least. So it's, how do you find the problems to work on besides the analytics projects or requests you get from teams? Any structure or routine you follow for that?
That's a great. That's another great question. I believe that routine needs to be created, right? Like, and it depends on the level of data-driven culture that exists in the company. There are some routines that we just try to develop with like just like recurring meetings, you know, where we expect the analytics person and the non-analytics person to at least sit and talk about what's happening. Right? There would be like a lot of sharing there with like follow-up questions, follow-up analysis, and that's and it's in order to ensure that the context is still live in the analyst's brain, you know. So there is a balance of ways to find between an analyst being extremely proactive and so coming up with insights by him or herself, and the fact of being reactive. So the stakeholder that that comes and gives ideas. For me, it's a bit of a problem to consider both. To me, like the ideal would be a team working together, right? And using data as an asset, and then coming up with the problems to solve. That's usually like what I'm trying to do. I try to avoid that relationship between the two as being one supporting the other and the other like just giving orders. I don't think that works well, and that it kind of caps the power of the analysts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll jump to the last piece, that is the non-analyst lens. I think I have like 10 minutes, so I'll go a bit quickly there, but I only flag the non-technical skills here, and it's going to be really easy because to me they're the same: critical thinking, effective communication, problem solving, and functional sense. It has to be that way because the problems are being owned by the analytics team and the non-analytics team, right? They need to be in sync in terms of how they see the problems, and without this, it doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. If communication is not there, let's say I'm not able to formulate like the problem the right way, then it doesn't work. If you don't understand what the problems to solve yourself, then you cannot ask an analytics person to do so. You're supposed to have a great sense of what your product or business is doing as well, and be able to transfer that knowledge to your analyst. So yeah, for me, it's fairly easy. In terms of technical skills, I don't have a site for that, but I think there's like at least some basics in terms of data visualization and a bit of data manipulation that is required, because again, like analytics people are not only data ATMs. They're not just, I mean, the numbers do not belong to them. They belong to everyone. They're here to facilitate generation of insights, again, after manipulation, after collection, etc. But they're not like number crunchers only. So one thing that is important as well, I believe, and that happens a lot, and it's one of the challenges, it's anticipation. So I wanted to prompt the audience in trying to guess what this graph is about, but like because of the time, I'm just going to go through it. It's kind of a representation of a project with an analytics team, right? Like you have the project start, you have the deadline, and in wrong situations, you have like the non-analyst, so let's say the stakeholder, it can be a project manager, business owner, that comes with a requirement. And then like probably the stakeholder is not aware of like all the tasks that are required for the analytics person to perform, right? It can be like the wrangling, it can be like the detective, it can be the artist, it can be anything, right? But there's a lot going on, right? And in that scenario, there's like a simple request that comes, right? A long work from the analyst, and then like the stakeholder that comes and say, oh, actually, that's not what I wanted. Then they would work together in having like another meeting where they're actually discussing about what was generated that was not relevant. So, and again, it leads to a long contribution of the analyst, and sometimes like it passes the deadline, right? Because the operations on the analytics side are usually quite long, and the stakeholders, the non-analytics people, need to be aware of this. Right? So the ideal is usually to have like, again, them working as a team at start, understanding all together what the analytics team needs to do, what is the problem, what they're trying to solve, and then yeah, if it goes well, if it's like well kickstarted, then there's of course opportunity to even like meet the deadline even closer, right? So that's just the idea, ensuring that there's ownership of projects related to data for everyone, right? Then this one is quite important, is the other one that I wanted to mention about the potential challenges that exist and that I've seen in the past. Usually it's given to an analyst the responsibility of metrics and how the business is going. But again, it's important that to understand that the problem belongs to all, like project managers, designers, engineers, business owners. They all have to be aware of that. It's not because the analyst is the closest to the data that the rest of the team should not be aware of that. They, of course, don't have to manipulate it and mine it the same way, but at least they can either do it with the non-technical skills or just by thinking. But at the end of the day, it's the problem that is owned by everyone. Right? Data is just like a means to solve the problem. So that sense of co-ownership is really important to me. And it's something that needs to be pushed. I've seen that behavior a lot, again, of like people deflecting their responsibilities because it's just that there's numbers, there's graphs and all, but actually it goes beyond this. Right? It goes back as well to the feeling of being part of the team, like everyone's looking after the same thing. So yeah. I have a few closing notes, and then I'll take like the few questions that are in the chat. A few takeaways. So yeah, insights are the real gold. Usually the analytics teams are seen through the technical skills, the dashboards that they create, and the fact that they're like scientists, right? What really matters actually is not the power in extracting data and doing complicated things. No, the real power is how they can move lines, how they can question, how they can debate, how they can improve. And that's why like the main key thing there is to ensure that like it's about insights, right? Rather than the pure technical aspect of the job. Then the data-driven culture is a necessity to be enforced. It's so easy to get away from data. It's easy to just trust guts and then take decisions. But it creates the question that I had before, like how to ensure that that analytics people are being heard. Well, you can avoid sometimes data because it might be complicated, because you don't have time, you need to come up with proxies, you need to come up with your intuition. That happens, right? But usually it would be a problem for most, and it's crucial for businesses that want to optimize their returns, right? And especially in the industries that I've been in, to rely on data to make those informed decisions, right? And the moment you start doing this, and the moment you manage to embrace this as a routine, then it makes your company more successful. Yeah, again, like there's the team effort, right? It's not only on analytics to be data ambassadors. They are obviously the ones playing with the data, but like data is just a written translation of what a business is. Hence, it needs to be owned by everyone. If everyone wants to improve a business or product, well, they need to be aware of what data exists and what is possible, and then the analytics team will help further with like more technical things. And the last piece, I think it's important, especially given the psychology and usually the scholar background of analysts, to keep innovating. Like a big piece of being successful in data is to understand holistically concepts, right? And sticking to one particular angle is usually against the idea of having some critical thinking. There are always many ways to explore, to increase scalability of tools, to try new technologies. Sometimes it's not necessary, but it's always good to try the new things. And this field is quite vibrant. There's always a lot happening there. It's good to innovate, and sometimes innovation is just trying new things, right? Even as an individual analyst, I might want to jump from business analytics to marketing analytics because the fields are different. Data sets are different, goals are different. For my personal perspective, I think I've seen quite a lot of parts of the analytics business already. And in a way, it helps me carry stronger points of view on when I face a problem, because I kind of got some experience of how things should be done or not, and what is appropriate or not, whether we need to run an experiment or not. So in a way, it's like me collecting data for myself to be more successful in analytics, right? So yeah, that's about it for today. I hope it was insightful, and I can take more questions, I think. How does that work? Divya, at 6 p.m. Can we do a bit of overtime?
Hey, Vinh, I think you can take some questions. That's fine.
Cool. Thanks. Well, there's a lot. For the audience today, any resources, books to check out to hone these skills? Well, there are so many. I think I'll just call out, again, like one of my favorite author, that is like Edward Tufte, about the data visualization. All of his books are just nice, and to be honest, I'm yeah, maybe putting more accent on the artist part of an analyst, right? Like trying to explain concepts in a simple way, and yeah, Tufte does that really well in his books. You mentioned that some people are scared by the complexity of data. I happen to be such a person myself, and I wanted to ask if you could suggest some sources that I could refer to improve my technical plus non-technical skills. I'm going to suggest something different. Like, I think that it's a journey, right? I mean, even myself, I didn't start as a data person, but I was exposed to some small analysis, right? And it can be about anything. It can be about something that you're passionate about, and you can try to hone your skills there, right? With very, very simple tools, right? It can even be Excel. It can even be a free version of Tableau, let's say. I know that like okay, it was like early in my career, but like I'm quite into sports. And so what I was doing is that I was like outside of work, downloading some data sources about football players, right? And trying to get some stats out of that, as simple as that. So if you're scared about that, or if you feel that you're still scared, like take it slowly, of course, but you can do it like on things that you're passionate about. Who should own data sanity as a KPI? Analytics versus data engineering teams. Analytics can find the issues easier, but engineering can fix it faster, easier. That's a good question. I think that it's a shared KPI, to be honest. Engineering might not necessarily be aware of how the data is used either, and the analytics team is not necessarily aware of how the data is being put from the lake to the main databases, for example. So it has to be both ways, in my opinion. How do you quantify the contribution by analytics, as most of the time it goes in supporting business decisions? The output of analytics team depends heavily on how the solution was implemented by product and business, and can be biased. That is true. That is true, and that's why I want to consider like all the different angles. It's not, I mean, it's a teamwork, right? So of course, business decisions are being made, and we see the analytics team as supporting. But at the same time, there's always space for the analytics team to generate new insights and be proactive. So I don't have like a ROI measurement per se. It cannot be like a number of dashboards, or it cannot be like a number of queries being run in database. It shouldn't be this, but for me, and it goes back to how we qualify the success or the critical thinking piece. It's all about ensuring that all problems are covered well, and that we're not making bad decisions, right? I mean, if the team is able to perform like some holistic analytics about that, then to me it is success. When the business users have to find a quick solution about the problem and need quick answer, then ask the analytics team. So what analysts can do to answer it when there is no time for them to do analysis first? Yeah, that's to me part of like what the non-analyst lens was about. There's for sure a need for those stakeholders to know what are the operations that analytics people are performing. And it usually takes a while, as you've seen in that representation I was trying to make. Usually it takes a matter of seconds or minutes for the stakeholder to ask, but then it takes a lot of time for the analyst to come up with something. So when the analyst doesn't have time, I believe that one, it's tough, but two, there's a need to understand like data is not necessarily always available, and takes a lot of time to get. So what I would suggest is to ensure that like whatever hypothesis this business person has, it probably comes with a minimal idea of some data already. Like it can be data from the past, it can be like a proxy metric where they can come up with, and usually the analyst with that business user can come up with the right proxy there in order to solve a solution. There's this problem of sometimes being too data driven and always want to have like new analysis, new things. But as long as like the level of how to say, the level of coverage of a business problem is high enough, then it should be good in the sense that you can always inform more decisions with always more data, but like you already have like a good sense. So that's why usually I would go with proxies, or I would go with historical data, this type of things. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Vinh. So I'll quickly take a moment to share my screen.
Yep.
Second. Okay, cool. Thank you everyone for attending the session with Vin, and of course Vin for giving us insights this weekend. I would take a moment to thank our donors. Also, I would want to introduce you guys to the next session that we have with Aditya, and he's a data scientist at Tesla. So it would be great to see you all there. I would also request you all to, switch on your cameras so that we can have a small group photograph. I mean, it's unfortunate that we've not been able to meet personally, so we can have a short picture. I'll just inform you as soon as I take the shot. I would request everyone to switch on their cameras if possible. Okay, cool. So probably you can pose now. Okay, cheese, guys. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this weekend. It was great having you all.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys.
And special hi to my mom that just managed to connect to the Zoom after 1 hour and a half.
Okay, thanks for joining in.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye. Take care.